Hi, and welcome to another Swift Basics video. In this video, we're going to look at loops. More specifically, what is a loop? Why do we use loops? What's the difference between a for loop and a while loop? And then, most importantly, how do we actually create those in Swift? So let's get started. Okay, so first and foremost, what is a loop? Now, it may be fairly self-explanatory, but essentially a loop is a structure that repeats instructions or our section of code until a certain condition is met. So there's two different types of loops. They're what we call for loops and while loops. So the main difference being is for loops are usually used if we know how many times you want to run through a loop. So if we know we want to loop something 5 times, we'd use a for loop. While loops tend to be loops that we don't know how many times they're going to loop through. So it will keep looping an indefinite amount of times until a certain condition has been met. So for example, we might have a program that we just want to print all the numbers from 1 to 10. Now you could go through and say print 1, print 2, but obviously that's quite onerous. Using a loop, we can just loop through the numbers 1 to 10 and print them as we go. So why use loops? Well, essentially, they're helping you to reduce the amount of code that you need to use. If you have something like I said, if you think about that printing numbers, writing a print statement every single line is pretty inefficient. Putting it inside a loop essentially allows us to keep our code nice and efficient and shorter than it would be if we did it without. So let's jump in and actually try and create a couple of loops in Swift. So I'm going to jump back into my Swift Basics playground. And I've opened up my sidebar over here. And I'm going to create a new page called loops. And I'm going to go and close that sidebar. Okay. So I now have a loops page. So for both of these loops, I'm actually going to create a variable just to make it a little bit easier. And I'm going to create a variable called I. And I'm going to assign it 0. Now, you might be thinking, why am I using I? There's no real great explanation. Essentially, we usually if we are in a loop, and particularly if we're looping through numbers or something like that, we tend to use I as the placeholder for those numbers. But essentially, it can be anything that you want it to be. So if you have a name or letter or something that makes a little bit more sense for your program, then go ahead and use that. So the first thing we're going to do is create a for loop. So to create a for loop, nice and simple, we write for, and then I in, and we want to loop through the numbers 1 to 10. So I'm going to write 1, then I'm going to put 3 dots, and then I'm going to put 10. So what that is saying is for I in 1 to 10. Okay, so for our variable I in 1 to 10, what do we want it to do each time? We want it to print I. Okay, so let's zoom in on that one a little bit more. So we have our variable I assigned 0, and we're saying for that variable in 1 to 10, print I. So essentially what that will do is loop through numbers 1 to 10. So I is just a placeholder for the numbers 1 to 10 as it cycles through. So let's go ahead and run that code. So you can see that we have over here, we've got something a little bit different. So we've got 10 times. So if I go ahead and click that, all you'll see is 10. If I add viewer, all I'll see is 10 as well. That's essentially because that's the last value that was printed. If we go ahead and click on the box and go list, we can see all the values that were printed in that loop. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. So a really simple for loop that allows us to loop through a range of numbers and print each number as we go. So what about a while loop? So we're going to still use our I variable, but instead of for, we're going to start our while loop with while. And we're going to say while I, so our variable I, which we know at this point in time is 0, is less than 10. So remember less than, so we've got the small side of the point pointing towards the I because we want it to check if it's less than 10. We're going to use our curly braces again, or curly brackets, and we're going to print I. So at the moment it looks exactly the same. The trouble is, if we go ahead and print that now, it will keep going and going and going because I has been assigned 0 and it will always be 0, which means that it will always be less than 10, which means we're going to get stuck in an infinite loop. So what we need to do is reassign the value of our variable I. So what we want to do is when it loops through once, we want it to be 1. When it loops through twice, we want it to be 2, and so on. So the way that we do that is we reassign I plus 1. So what that will do is take whatever value is being stored in I and add 1 to it. So the first time it loops through, it's going to add 1 to 0 and make it 1. The second time it loops through, it's going to add 1 to 1, which will make it 2, and so on and so on. So let's go ahead and run that code. Okay, so you can see we've got the same 10 times here, which is a good sign. So if I go ahead and click that, what I actually have here is a graph. So this is just another way of essentially viewing how we've gone up in numbers. But to see it how we saw it before, let's go ahead and click on list, and you can see we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. Okay, so there you have it. That is how you create a for loop and a while loop in Swift. I hope that that has been useful, and if it has, please consider checking out some of my other videos. Thanks.